Hi, welcome to Creative View of Pacific Fabrics. I'm Erin Hubner, and today we're going to talk about a fun, simple project to update your holiday table, which will also make a wonderful gift if you want to send to friends or family that you would normally celebrate with, but you can't this year. We are going to be making placemats and napkins. These are actually double-sided, which is great because it makes them a little bit heftier and it allows a lot of fun prints to be used. This one is actually our Nomis collection, which is available in our web store in a variety of prints. We also made an option using our wave and solstice lines for a little bit of extra color that'll definitely go pretty much year round. The great thing about this is you can get 2 placemats and 2 napkins as long as you get 2 yards of fabric, 1 of each print. Basically, we're talking about rectangles and squares. The first thing you're going to want to do is pre-wash your fabric. After that, you're gonna take it over and you're going to need to cut it to the dimensions necessary. This one, when I was cutting out the napkin, I accidentally cut it out a little bit wrong. That's fine. I'm going to use my Kai rotary cutter, put it at the light setting, grab a ruler, and all I'm gonna do is line it up on that edge. Cut that extra off. Now that we have our 2 pieces of fabric, the most important thing to do, and for the napkin, I cut these so they were 20.5 inches by 20.5 inches. That's going to allow us to have a 20-inch napkin with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You want to make sure you have the nice or pretty sides of your fabric touching, because we are actually going to be sewing these inside out. We are going to be sewing these in a square. The easiest way to do that is to make sure you start with a gap in the middle. I'm going to use my marker. This is my Clover marker, and I'm going to make a few little marks. They don't need to be dark, just to show that gap. It's important to make sure you leave that gap in the middle and not by the corner, because this is going to be the easiest way to make sure your lines end up. Trying to turn a corner with a gap is a lot harder, and it's going to be more difficult to make sure it looks nice. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some pins and line it all up. And what the pins are going to do is they're going to make it easier for me to sew it. And I am going to just be really quick because these are straight lines. I'm going to pin them far within the seam allowance, and I'm just going to leave them in there while I sew. If for some reason they don't 100% match up, that is okay. We're still going to go ahead and sew it. And that's going to be on the inside where no one will see it. I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and I want to make sure that my needle is going to be in the center position. So depending on your machine, you're going to want to change it to that. Because while I say we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, as long as we're consistent, that's all that truly matters. So what I'm going to be doing is lining up the edge of my fabric with the edge of the presser foot right where my mark is. I'm going to lower it and then lower my needle. It's super important to make sure you backstitch beginning and end so your stitches don't come out. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go forward 3 stitches, and then I'm going to go backwards. And that's it. And then if I was doing the corner, I would just sew all the way. And when I think I'm about a 1/4 inch, I'm going to leave my needle down in my fabric. I'm going to lift the presser foot up. I'm going to pivot my fabric, and that way I can see I'm going to have a nice sharp corner, and I won't have to start and stop all the time. Hi, we're back with part 2 of making our placemats and napkins. We've already sewn all of it in a square, and it's going to look like this. It is important to make sure you clip your threads. It's wonderful to have a little pair of thread snips so you're not carrying your big scissors everywhere by the machine, because you just need little snips. And as you can see, there is my gap right there. I backstitched at the beginning, I sewed all the way around, and when I got to the end, I backstitched again. That's gonna make sure our stitches doesn't come out. And again, in case things aren't perfectly lined up, don't worry about it. It's on the inside. No one's gonna see it. There's no reason to try and redo it. We wanna make sure we have nice sharp corners. So all I'm gonna do is clip. You don't wanna get too close to your stitches because we don't wanna accidentally put a hole in our fabric, but you do wanna make sure that we take some of the bulk out of the corners. So you will do that on all 4 corners. And when we are done, it's going to look like this. If you are making a napkin, this is when we're going to turn it right side out. However, if you're making a placemat, we need to do one more step. And for that, what we need to do is we're going to add a little bit of fusible batting. So what we're going to do for the placemat for our fusible batting is we are going to actually apply it after we've sewn the 2 pieces together. And that is because we don't want to have our batting all the way to the edge, because when we turn it right side out, it's going to add too much bulk. So when we cut the batting, it is going to be what our finished measurements are. For the placemat, it's 14 inches by 19. So you're going to cut your batting so it's exactly that size. It's a little bit off. Again, it doesn't worry. You're going to set it down on top of a pressing mat and your fabric. It's going to want to gently grip. Make sure when you do it, you have the dots or the kind of rougher side of the fusible fleece against the fabric you want it to adhere to. If you have it sticky side up, it's going to get all that gunk on your iron. Turn it upside down, put it on our pressing mat, and now we're going to take our iron and we're going to press. The difference between pressing and ironing is all in the motion. When we press, we set our iron down, we leave it there, we pick it up, and then we move it over. That's what you want to do while you're in the process of sewing. If I were to slide it back and forth, what that will do is actually distort the fibers and the fabric a little bit. We don't want to do that while we're creating it, because any of those distortions will stay inside and remain in your project. So all we're going to do is we're just going to keep doing this. You're going to probably hold it down for about 10-15 seconds per area. And then you're just going to keep overlapping all the way, and that's going to make sure it's nice and attached to your placemat. After we have that done, it is time to turn it right side out. So what we're going to do, we're going to reach into our gap we left. I like to grab the first corners first, and we're just going to gently pull everything out through that hole. So you can see all of our beautiful fabric that's going to be on the outside. At times, it can be a bit of a challenge to get the corners all the way pushed out with your fingers. So what I'm going to do, I am going to take my sewing gauge, and I'm gonna put it in here, and I'm going to very gently in the corner use that to tease the corner out. If it doesn't 100% want to do it, that is fine, but we will want to do that with all the corners so that they are nice and sharp. You want to be very careful. I would never use my thread snips or scissors to do this, because it's too easy to accidentally poke a hole into it. Our next step after this is going to be pressing. We want this to look nice and smooth. So all we're going to do is line it up with our iron. Try and do that with the edges a little bit, and we'll grab it And again, we're just gonna press, lining up the edges and go all the way around. Hi, welcome back to part 3 of our napkin and placemat tutorial. So now we have this all pressed. We need to make sure this gap is closed because we don't want to have an opening in our pocket. So what I'm going to use is the Sew Line glue pen, and I'm just going to gently put a little bit of glue along the edge. And then I'm going to use that to press it. What that is going to do, it's going to hold that shut, so when we do a line of top stitching all the way across, we don't have to worry about pins, and we don't have to worry about our fabric trying to roll out. Okay, so now that we have our seam glued down, we're going to take it back to the machine for top stitching. Top stitching is usually 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. It is very hard to eyeball that. So what we are going to do is, in most machines, they come with a blind hem foot. And what that looks like is it has a little blade in the center, and it often has a little bump in the middle. If you have an edge stitching foot, that will work as well. Typically that's not included, but the blind hem foot is. The reason for this is we are going to be lining it up against our fabric with it butted up against the blade. What that is going to do is, with our needle in the left hand position, oops, do it like that, it's going to allow us to have a nice even line of stitching all the way around and make things easier. So when you are doing your stitching, before it didn't really matter what color of thread you used. This will, because it's going to be visible. I used a white on this side and actually had a black thread I used on the back. That is perfectly fine on something like this. Your bobbin and your thread do not need to match. So all you're going to do is replace your foot. Make sure your needle is in the left-hand side. And what I like to do, especially with top stitching, is I'm going to start and stop on a place that is mostly white. There's a little bit of extra stitching that you see when you back stitch. And if I did on the red, it would be very visible. But on the white, it's just going to blend in. I'm going to put it down. Again, do my 3 stitches forward. And typically when I do my top stitching on a napkin, I actually increase my stitch length a little bit. So while I use 2.5 for the rest of the construction, for this I'm going to use 3.0. So as you can see right there, it really blends in. And where you have the little bit extra thread from where you've been back stitching, in the white, it is not going to show up at all on these little gnome beards. Because we have our glue holding it in place, and we used a 1/4 inch seam allowance earlier, this is going to hold our gap closed, and you're never going to be able to tell the difference of where it was versus where it was stitched twice. Once we have done completely with that, we can see the final project. Okay. And here we are with our finished place settings. On this side, we have our gnomies. On this one, we have our solstice and our wave. So depending on how you feel, you can decide what you want your dinner theme to be. And these are great because you can make them in colors used throughout the year, whether or not it's for a specific holiday or just for every day. And the great thing about these is, remember, everything is double-sided, so you can have 2 options in one. Thank you for joining us with Creative View of Pacific Fabrics.